We're going to be talking about the book of Revelation. Today we'll just deal with kind of the background information about the book as a whole, and then next week we'll talk about the content of the book itself. In the Greek, this book is titled Apocalypsis. It is the revelation of John the prophet. This is the only book in the New Testament that has both the content and the literary form of an apocalypse. This literary form was extremely popular in New Testament times. It would not have been seen as a strange or foreign type of writing, at least for Jewish readers. Let's talk about the apocalyptic features that this book contains. There are several elements that define the literary apocalypse. In other words, that identify a writing as belonging to that genre. First of all, that it's a vision. An apocalypse is a disclosure of divine mysteries regarding man, creation, and history. The word itself, apocalypse, means to reveal. The typical way this is done is through visions. Generally, Greek visions are oracular. They are heard. But generally, Jewish visions are visual. They're full of rich imagery. Another feature of apocalyptic literature is symbolism. 278 verses of Revelation have an Old Testament reference, though there is no single direct quotation. The symbols are used from Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel. When Domitian began his purge, the first two groups he rounded up were actors and cartoonists. This book uses very powerful images to portray its message. This type of literature is probably the most popular form. We like powerful images. There are many writings in Second Temple Judaism that use this method of writing. If you think of it today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is very popular, and apocalyptic literature has that kind of very powerful dynamic imagery. Unity of history is another common feature in apocalyptic books. All this literature assumes that there is an end to an old order and the beginning of a new order. In the New Testament, there's an overlap between this order and the next by the resurrection of Jesus. The Eastern philosophy of a cyclical, unending repetition of things is not present in apocalyptic literature. It's the exact opposite. History is linear. We are in a current evil age, and we are expecting the coming of a future good age. Isaiah 24 through 27 and 60 through 66 are apocalyptic sections in Isaiah, although the book as a whole is not considered apocalyptic. And finally, dualism. There can be no true apocalypse without a champion who wins and a dark empire that battles to the end but is doomed to fail. If the bad guys win, it's not an apocalypse. It's ironic that so many horror films have used Revelation as kind of their starting point for creating their horror movies, when truly the point of apocalyptic literature is that the good wins in the end. Revelation is a mysterious book. There are several features of Revelation that make it unique. So even though it clearly meets the requirements to be considered an apocalypse, there are other elements that don't quite fit that genre. There's an opening and a closing to the book. It has an epistolary opening and closing. That's not common in an apocalypse. Also, within it, there are 7 enclosed letters. The drama's in the middle, the playing out of the end of time. In the beginning, there are 7 letters to 7 churches. It's very clear that all the churches read all the letters, so the whole book was sent to all 7 churches. There's no evidence that any church received a copy with only its own letter. Each of these letters ends with, "Hear what the Spirit says to the churches," in plural. So clearly they were all intended to read all 7 letters. The idea is for this to go to all the churches. In the New Testament, Asia always refers to the Roman province. The 7 churches are on the Roman road system in Asia Minor. Modern roads have been built over these old Roman ways. Today, you travel the same routes as they did in New Testament times. The churches are named in the order of the delivery of the letter. From the arrival at the port in Ephesus, the road would be followed north, then east. Some claim that the order of the 7 letters refers to 7 different periods in church history. I don't believe that's right. The order has to do with geography, not ecclesiastical history. Laodicea, Colossae, and Hierapolis were popular places for vacationing. The Lydian kingdom was the richest kingdom in the area. Spirit of prophecy. John does not describe what he is doing as an apocalypse, but as prophecy. Apocalyptic literature is pseudonymous. That is a common feature. But this book is unique in that John identifies himself as author. He does not choose some famous figure of the past to write in his name, Enoch or Moses or Abraham. He writes in his own names, and that is why he calls it a prophecy. The book has images of Christ. It has several images that represent Jesus, although he is never identified by name. But any Christian reading this immediately knows we're talking about Jesus. There's this vision of the exalted Son of Man. It begins with this vision of the Son of Man walking among the lampstands, and we know him by his attributes. Also, we have the imagery of the lion and the lamb. We see the lamb take the book, the scroll of God's grand plan in his hand. And at the end, he appears as a victorious warrior riding on a horse. Any child can hear this book and clearly identify Christ in these 3 images. Today, many people overcomplicate the book and miss the obvious. Understanding this book is about seeing Jesus Christ. This book is the strongest Christological book of the Bible. Be sure as you're reading it that you don't lose this power. There's a tendency to enter into an agenda-driven view of the book. Don't make all theology hang on your millennial view. Don't make a millennial view into a confession. There are strong evangelical leaders who stand across the full range of interpretation on this book. Don't exclude them just because you disagree. If you miss Jesus Christ in the book, you've missed the whole point of the book. It's not about making charts of the future. Another feature of the book is recapitulation and narrative time. When the 6th seal on the scroll is broken, chapter 6, it's the end, the day of the Lord, the great judgment. But in chapter 7, verse 1, it's not over. It continues. When the 7th element is reached, the book goes back, rewinds, and starts over. There's a repetitive development in this book. 7 seals, which break out into 7 trumpets, which break out into 7 bowls. And it's like every time you kind of jump back. You have the 7 sealed scroll in chapters 4 through 11, and the little book in chapters 12 through 22. And it's the pattern of, you have a pattern of 4 elements, then 2, then an interlude, and the final element. So the first 4 go together, then you have 5 and 6, and then there's a dramatic pause of some sort, and finally the 7th item is presented. And in each, the 7th takes you to this kind of culminating, this is kind of the end of it. But then it rewinds and begins the next series. It's very clear that the bowls match the trumpets. Chapters 4 through 11 describe the content of the 7 seal scroll. John then is tired, and he's given a little sweet book that is bitter in his stomach. The little book is developed in chapters 12 through 19 and centers on the figures that have brought about this conflict. It isn't until we see these figures that the number 3.5 is introduced, 3.5. So what approaches are there to interpreting Revelation? Most of them can be grouped under 4 major headings, although many people will combine elements of these different views. The first would be the preterist view. This view would hold that Revelation addresses historical realities only. Everything described in the book from our point of view has already taken place. This view has been presented throughout the history of the church. Today, Lutherans and the Reformed Church tend to hold to this view. There's the historicist view. To these people, Revelation outlines the history of the world. To the historicist, the final period in this historical progression is always the time he is living in. That's a very popular view today. We are now in this final period. Might be interesting to note that Augustine held this view. So that's been a common view, people thinking we're in this final period throughout all of Christian history. Then the futurist view. There are many variants of the view. Most of these see Revelation as addressing the time of its writing, but also dealing with a future end that has not yet occurred. The most radical futurist view, such as the view of classical dispensationalism, places the meaning of practically all of Revelation in the future. And finally, there's the idealist view. To these people, Revelation represents in vivid imagery broad concepts, not specific historical details. It's more about the struggle between the forces of good and evil in all ages than about specific events in any given time period. And let's talk about numerical symbolism. I think this is a very important part of understanding Revelation. Let me say, some people are inexplicably haphazard in their application of this principle, so that some numbers are interpreted symbolically, but others are, and some people are adamant about this, others have to be understood as literal numbers, not representing a concept. And I think that leads to a very uneven approach to interpretation. The numbers in Revelation represent ideas, much the way the number 13 represents something very specific to us today, to the point that high-rise buildings don't have 13th floors because it's considered an unlucky number. A common mistake in viewing Revelation is to see some numbers as symbolic, others as literal. Rather than try to guess which should be understood symbolically and which shouldn't, I think it's better to view them all symbolically, as this is the way apocalyptic literature is written. Numbers are used to convey ideas rather than quantities. So let's go through the meanings associated with some basic numbers. The number 2 is associated with a true witness. This comes from the law of Moses. The witness in any capital case had to be established by at least 2 witnesses. So in Jewish thought, if you had 2 witnesses verifying something, then you had established the truth of that thing. So that the number 2 is used that way in Revelation. We have the 2 witnesses. I mean, how could you miss that? The number 3 is associated with God. It's the divine number. And this, we tend to think of it today in terms of the Trinity. Of course, God is triune in nature. How could the number 3 not be associated with God? But even in the Old Testament, before the incarnation of Jesus, when the idea of the Trinity had not yet been revealed and fully developed, it was already the number associated with God. And I believe it's because it has to do with how you can consider a thing. There are 3 ways you can consider a thing. You can consider it in a declarative sense. Something is, just merely stating something about it. Or you can begin to compare it. You can use the comparative and say something is better than something else. And then the third state is the superlative. When you look at a thing and try to consider its nature, you can say it is the best. It is the maximal. And in that sense, the number 3 attains to that third state of superlative. And in any given consideration, God always attains to this third highest. He is always the est. in whatever comparison you're going to bring up. He always attains to this third maximal degree. The number 4 is associated with the created order. And this makes sense given ancient thought that the earth had 4 corners, and perhaps that's simply metaphorical speech, but they spoke of the 4 corners of the earth. The practice from antiquity to this day of arranging our cartography and our understanding of the geography of the world in 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. Why not 3? Why not 5? But we have 4. Also there was the ancient idea that everything that exists was composed of 4 elements: earth, fire, water, and wind. All of these things are associated with the idea that number 4 represents the created order. The number 6 is an interesting number, and we'll talk a little bit later about number 7, which represents perfection. And number 6 is associated with number 7 in the sense that it is very close and almost the same, but not quite. And in Revelation specifically, the number is associated with false spiritual forces that pretend to be something they're not. It's the number that's close to perfection but does not reach it. And it's used to refer to false religious forces that lay claim to things which only the Messiah truly attains to. And the number 10 is associated with something that is complete. If you think about it, every person, unless there's some genetic abnormality, has 10 fingers and 10 toes. So 10 becomes the idea that's associated with something that's complete. Nothing is missing. All of it's there. Then we have combined numbers that are arrived at by combining other numbers. The number 7 combines the number 4, which is the number for the created order, with the number 3, which is the number of the Godhead. And this represents the union of the material and the spiritual, of the Creator and His created order, and conveys the idea of perfection. The number 12, you can arrive at it also by multiplying 4 times 3, and it is associated with the people of God and has been from the beginning because Israel had 12 tribes. And in the church, Jesus was very intentional about singling out 12 disciples, 12 apostles. And it's very interesting, and this is one of the very prominent features in the book of Revelation, is that John sees these 12s as being joined together. So we find the number 24 in the book of Revelation. There are 24 elders around the throne of God, and these represent the idea of the 12 tribes of the Old Covenant and the 12 apostles of the New Covenant as being joined together into one people of God through all the history of the world. And that is also found when we arrive at the end of the book, this description of the city of God, the New Jerusalem, which has come down from heaven to earth, and God is now abiding, residing on earth with us. And from this holy city, the bride of the Lamb, the invitation issues out to the whole world to come in and find healing and come inside the city. Well, this city has 12 gates and 12 stones, foundation stones, and the city is associated both with the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles of the Lamb. So there's this interest in Revelation to see the whole people of God as one continuous thing, joined together through all history, the eternal people of God, so to speak. And this is brought to its highest point with the number 144,000. This is not just 12 plus 12. This is 12 times 12. And then you multiply that times 10 3 more times. So you have basically 3 numbers mashed together here. The number 12, which represents the people of God. the number 10, which represents completion. So this is the full people of God. Nobody's missing. And you have taken 12 and 12 and multiplied it by itself, so that you're talking about both old and new covenant, the people of God, the complete people of God in all human history. The idea of this seamless people of God. And in Revelation, there is not a Jewish plan and a Gentile plan. There is one plan of God for one human race. And then the multiplication time of 10, the complete, 3 times means that this is God's chosen people. The divine number is associated as well. And the number 666. So this, I've already talked about the number 6 being kind of false religion, the pretender, and it's here used in the triplicate, using the divine number 3 to highlight the arrogance of this false claim, not only to messiahship or to the status of prophet or spokesperson for God, but actually claiming divinity. When readers are told in Revelation 13:18 to calculate the number of the beast, they're being asked to understand who it is that is making a false claim to divinity. This is not a call to Kabbalistic numerology or attempting to assign number values based on positions of letters in the alphabet, or switching it from Greek, which is what it was written in, to Hebrew, and then trying to assign values to things. That is, I believe, not what is meant by calculating the number of the beast. I think the readers are meant to understand, who do we see that is claiming to be God, who isn't God? And I think the very obvious answer to that would have been Domitian. And then finally, the broken number, 3.5. And 3.5 is half of 7, the perfect number. This is a key number in the book. There's an unholy trinity associated with this broken number. In chapter 11, verse 2, the temple is trodden down for 42 months, which is 3.5 years. In chapter 12, the dragon sends his sea beast, followed by his earth beast. There is a time given, 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years if you're following the ancient calendar of 360 days. In chapter 14, the same period is described as a time, times, and half a time. So 1 plus 2 plus half is 3.5. This idea represents an indefinite period associated with a period of suffering of the Messiah and the people of God. This number is found throughout apocalyptic literature. Note that 3.5 is that halfway to perfection, right? In every case in Revelation, we find the people of God in the midst of suffering and persecution every time this number is used. It conveys the idea of a hopeful middle. God's people know the fullness of perfection is coming, but they're somewhere stuck in the middle of its implementation. There's uncertainty about how long this period is going to last, but God's people are called to be faithful and to persevere because they will be brought through to perfection. Okay, so let's get into the book itself, the typical things we try to answer about a book. Who wrote the book? Who was the author? If any of the writings attributed to John should be definitely attributed to him, this is the one, because of all the writings attributed to John, this is the only one in which the author identifies himself explicitly as John the Apostle. He identifies as God's slave in chapter 1, verse 1, doulos, and as brother to his readers and partner in the affliction, kingdom, and perseverance that are in Jesus, chapter 1, verse 9. As early as AD 155, Justin, in his dialogue with Trypho, that would be chapter 81, verse 4, he explicitly identified the Apostle John as the author of Revelation. From this point forward, Johannine authorship was affirmed by Irenaeus, by Tertullian, by Clement of Alexandria, by Hippolytus, and by Eusebius. Now, when we talk about authorship, one of the objections to Johannine authorship is that the language is the grammar more than the language. The grammar is very different from any of the other books attributed to John. Revelation has very unusual grammar and vocabulary. These are called solecisms. It's the use of ungrammatical speech. John will do this regularly. There's a grammar of ungrammar in the book. He'll mismatch the number of a subject with its verb. He'll use a participle when he shouldn't. These and other irregularities are not accidental. They're intentional. Now, several explanations have been offered. Some say that it's just Semitic, Hebraizing style of the Greek. John uses a Greek writing style that is basically he's thinking in Hebrew and writing in Greek. The problem with this view is that there's no other example of this style of writing to compare it with. Others suggest, no, it's because he was in an ecstatic state when he wrote this. He was having these visions and somehow was out of it, and that explains he was kind of in a stupor. His brain was addled, and he wrote oddly because of the ecstatic state in which he found himself. Another explanation for this very different grammar is the lack of a secretary. All the other writings of John that we have, some suggest, are the product of a collaboration with an amanuensis, a scribe, somebody who was more versed in Greek than John was. Here in exile on Patmos, John is thought to have been without the assistance of such a secretary, and thus he committed many grammatical errors because his Greek was not as polished as other people's might have been. They would say this is the real John without an amanuensis, without a secretary. Others point to John's advanced age as the reason. He's very old, perhaps slightly senile. But does fact support this idea? Do writers lose their writing ability with old age? And there really is no evidence of that. Typically, literature is not written by younger people, but by older people. And a final explanation is that this is a grammar of ungrammar. And this, I think, is perhaps a more acceptable view. John wrote this, and there's a mixture of factors behind the grammatical errors, including the exile condition he was in, the lack of an amanuensis. But it seems also like John continually and deliberately mixed his codes. And the idea being this is a way to protect the message of the book. Not only is the symbolism very coded, and if Roman authorities ran across a copy of this book, not only would they say, well, I can't make any sense of these images, but as they read it, they would notice the grammatical errors and think this is just the rambling of some senile old Jew who hardly knew his Greek, and were more likely to dismiss it than to try to destroy the book or chase it down and get rid of it. So perhaps there's some deliberate grammatical fudging on John's side as a way of protecting the book. If the time frame is Domitian's reign, and if the witness of the early church fathers is correct, then John was the only apostle who would have been alive in the final decade of the first century during the reign of Domitian to write the book of Revelation. Everything points to John, the apostle, as the author of this book. What about provenance? Where was the author when he wrote this? This is one of the few books in the Bible where the author very clearly tells us exactly where he is. The author of Revelation tells us, I, John, your brother and partner in the affliction, kingdom, and perseverance that are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos because of God's message and the testimony concerning Jesus. That's chapter 1, verse 9. I've actually visited the island of Patmos. It's a small little island, very nice, but not much to do there. It's off the coast of modern-day Turkey right now. So that's where he was. He was on this small island as he wrote. Now, who did he write it to? Who are the recipients? So John identifies 7 congregations as his recipients: to Ephesus, and to Smyrna, and to Pergamum, and to Thyatira, and to Sardis, and to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. Chapter 1, verse 11. These were all cities in Asia Minor, what is modern-day Turkey. The book is written for Christians facing persecution by overly zealous regional emperor cults. What can we say about the date? Now, generally, chapter 13 is the part of Revelation used most to date the book. There are historical allusions in the book itself. In chapter 13, we have a beast described, rising from the sea. It's given power by the dragon, which is clearly Satan. Many find ways to calculate numbers by switching from Greek to Hebrew and come up with the name Nero. But if the number 666 is meant to point to a false prophet who is claiming divinity, Domitian was the emperor who insisted on being addressed as God. So I'm not a fan of this idea of let's flip into Hebrew and chase down what word we might be using in Hebrew, and or what number values we can assign to letters in the alphabet. I think that's completely the wrong way to go about it. I've already talked about this. There's a conceptual idea associated with the number 6. You triplicate it, and not only is this false prophecy, but it's false prophecy claiming divinity. And Nero did not do that, but Domitian did. And then there's in chapter 17 this list of kings. And people struggle to make sense of this. There was a big myth circulating in Asia Minor near the end of the 1st century. And it was the myth of the rebirth of Nero Redivivus. So if we look at chapter 17, verses 9 through 14, where do we begin counting the first 5 emperors of Rome? Now, most of us would start with Julius Caesar, but the title of emperor was not granted to Julius Caesar. It began with Augustus, then Tiberius, and after him Caligula, then Claudius and Nero. Those would be the 5. After Nero, there was a civil war, and there's 1 year in which 4 different men claimed to be the Caesar. But really, after the dust settled at the end of that year of civil war, the one who emerged victorious was Vespasian. So if we count him as the 6th and ignore the other 3 in that year during that turmoil, he was followed by his son Titus. Then the 8th would be Domitian. In Revelation, the beast, a reincarnated emperor, is the 8th king. There's a popular myth about the reincarnation of Nero that circulated in Asia Minor, and there are people in Asia Minor who thought Domitian was Nero come back. The earliest view in the church was that the beast was Nero, but there's no way for him to count as the 8th emperor. Today, most favor Domitian as that emperor. Nero persecuted Christians in Rome, but under Domitian, the persecution extended into Asia Minor, where locals were zealous in pushing the emperor cult. The great harlot is clearly associated with Rome. If John were to write under Nero, it would have been during the 60s. If he wrote under Domitian's, he wrote in the early 90s. And finally, there's external evidence. Irenaeus wrote around AD 180 in his Against Heretics, book 5, chapter 30, verse 3. He stated, and let me read his quote. He talked about him who beheld the apocalyptic vision, for that was seen not very long time since, but almost in our day, toward the end of Domitian's reign. So he clearly says that John wrote relatively recently, 85 years ago, under Domitian's reign. So given the internal evidence of the book itself and the external attestation by Irenaeus, the persecution under Domitian seems the better choice for the date of writing, so probably around 95. What is the situation being faced? The letters to the churches paint a picture of the situation faced by the recipients of this book. The churches are facing attacks from within. There are false apostles, chapter 2, verse 2, who seek to deceive. There's a group identified as the Nicolaitans, and they're seeking to introduce a false teaching from within, chapter 2, verse 6. In Smyrna, there are Jewish opponents who are slandering Christians, and this is going to result in imprisonment and affliction, chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. The same is true in Philadelphia, in chapter 3, verse 9. In Pergamum, a Christian by the name of Antipas has already been martyred for his faith, chapter 2, verse 13. And this church in Pergamum also faces internal challenges as teachers promote a sensual lifestyle and encourage people to participate in the idolatrous cult, chapter 2, verse 14. Here too, the Nicolaitans are mentioned, chapter 2, verse 15. The problem of internal sensuality is present also in Thyatira, where a false prophetess encourages sexual immorality and participation in idolatry. She is named Jezebel, though likely this is coded language. It's unlikely that that would be her actual name, but chapter 2, verse 20. There is in this church a false teaching described as knowing the depths of Satan, chapter 2, verse 24. Another problem faced by the churches is apathy or loss of passion. The church in Ephesus has abandoned its first love, chapter 2, verse 4. The church in Sardis is described as dead, chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. The church in Laodicea is lukewarm. It's neither hot nor cold, chapter 3, verses 15 and 16. The Laodiceans are trusting in their wealth, chapter 3, verse 17, but they have shut Jesus out. He stands outside their door knocking, asking to be allowed inside, chapter 3, verse 20. So I think that paints a good picture of the situation being addressed by Revelation. So what's the purpose of the book? John writes this book to explain how God has dealt with the problem of evil in creation in response to the concerns raised by Christians suffering persecution. The key question the book seeks to address is raised by the martyred saints beneath the altar, those who were slain because of the word of God and because of the witness they had held, chapter 6, verse 9. And in verse 10, this is what they ask: "How long, Master, holy and true, will you not judge and avenge our blood on those dwelling on the earth?" Why does God allow evil empires to oppress those who are turning to God and seeking to do His will? The book of Revelation is a Christian theodicy, a defense of the goodness of God in the face of evil, addressed not to unbelievers, but to believers who are struggling with persecution. God has dealt with the problem of evil by coming in the form of the Lamb to give His life to rescue all creation from sin and death. Human history is a dance between God and sinful humankind, which He is not destroying, but is rather calling to repentance that they may be saved. The book is also meant to encourage Christian congregations in the face of persecution and of the insidious forces of worldly empires opposed to God and His Messiah that seek to draw people away from Jesus. John wants his readers to understand the realities of their current historical context in the broad structures of God's grand redemption plan, and he wants to inform them of the things that are going to be taking place very soon so that they will navigate the challenges that are coming successfully. He also wants to encourage Christians to center their hearts and hopes on the eternally secure salvation that Jesus Christ has accomplished on their behalf, being willing to remain true to the faith even in the face of death. the message of Revelation is that the persecution that is just beginning will not resolve soon. It will continue for some time, and Christians will have to embrace suffering and be willing even to die, for the redemption they have found in Jesus is worth any price. Okay, and that takes us through the historical background of the book of Revelation. Next week, we'll look at the book itself and its content. Have a great week.